Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday the 9th of June comes to you from London. And we are suffering a little bit of a hangover here in the UK this morning with the election result pointing to a hung parliament. And so that's not good news for the UK, and we'll take a look at what that means in terms of the markets. The dollar has risen quite strongly in the last day or two. I guess the sterling filtering in a little bit to that, but we are just seeing dollar strength returning in the short term. We are still medium term bearish, but long term bullish. And so, will this be a turning point in the longer term trend? At this stage, too hard to say. We don't have any real significant upside targets yet on the short-term chart, nor on the medium-term chart. It's only in the long-term chart. So, and we still do have downside targets. So it's too early to say. But the euro is falling away against the dollar, hitting strong resistance here on the cloud on the long-term chart. We said we needed to reverse these columns, and we haven't done that yet. So it's still a bearish chart in the long term, but we have seen some bullish upside in the medium term. But again, the short term has just turned bearish, and we are seeing a sell-off at the moment. Japanese yen, we're seeing the dollar rising here as well. So the dollar is just stronger against a basket of currencies. But of course, the one that everyone is looking at this morning is sterling. And we had a 2% fall pretty well straight away on the exit poll result. And what is most interesting about this bar is that we had this move down, we've had the reaction up, but then a move lower. So this is really the nail in the coffin, if you like, in the short term, because we've fallen, we've bounced a little bit, but then we've gone lower still. So we've effectively activated that downward selling thrust, and that's showing through in the 60-minute chart, and we're seeing downside to 1.23, $1.23. So we are now seeing, for the first time in a little while, a medium-term downside target. And we do still have an upside target to the medium term, but we have a lot of long-term targets still hanging over sterling, and those are now looking like they might come back into play. This is a very, very long chart. This goes back over 40 years. But interestingly, we are seeing here these downside targets, and as much as 8, 10, 20% downside. So if we see new lows in sterling, that will of course be very bad. So a fall through the 120 level is what we need to be keeping an eye out for. Taking a look at the 1 minute chart, of course we get a really, really short-term view of what's been going on. Press the T key on your system, and you see here we've got this downside target here of 123.60. That was given actually in late May, but so given a couple of weeks ago. Here's today's downward thrust, but actually not off a high. If we go to a smaller box size, we do see this downside target 122.50. That's consistent with that 123 level, and that of course is now activated with the move below that. So it looks like we've got another 3.5% downside, and in the nearer term, 125.70. That's a further 1% downside. We do have a reactive upside target this morning, but of course this is now in a bear trend. And if we go to an even smaller box size, we'll see this playing out in a real-time fashion. If you're watching sterling today, this is really the chart to be watching for new targets and trends. But at the moment, it's a bearish situation in the short term, and of course that is the key, is waiting for a reversal of that trend, but for the moment it's looking down. Looking against the euro, sterling is also suffering. We saw that euro is falling against the dollar, but sterling is falling further than the euro is. And if we look at the Swiss franc, we've had these targets actually in place for a little while. We've been talking about 120. That's 2.5% away. That's still looking on the cards. And the Australian dollar has been looking stronger lately as well, down nearly 2% here this morning, sterling. So we're seeing that playing through as well. So looking at US stock markets overnight, not much change in the S&P 500. We're just sort of hovering at this 2430s level, and really just fairly unchanged, fairly flat. We see over the last week we've been really just sitting this place, but we are still bullish on the upside. And the Nasdaq much the same. The Dow just moving a little bit higher yesterday, but struggling to break out really. And the Russell 2000 did have a strong day yesterday, and we see that showing in the 60-minute chart. So we're seeing the wider market in the US just starting to perform. So that's quite interesting. Taking a look at the S&P future, no real change at the moment, so hard to see where we'll go today. The Nasdaq E-mini up very, very slightly, virtually unchanged as well. Interestingly now, let's go to the UK market. We look at the FTSE 100 index, and we see here this morning that we are in fact up 0.5%, and that's a bit of a surprise after the election result. But of course, what we're seeing perversely is that because UK blue chip companies earn most of their earnings in dollars or foreign currency, the fall in sterling is going to boost their profits. So we're seeing that 2% it will improve profits for most multinational UK companies. So that's what's lifting the FTSE at the moment. No real clear direction here. We've got an upside target of 7676. That's 2.5% upside. The longer and medium term charts are bullish. The short term is still actually bearish below the cloud. So we are just in a mixed picture there. The FTSE 250 is falling quite sharply. We're down nearly 1%. This reflects the fact that most of the UK middle cap companies have less of an earnings effect in foreign currency. So we are seeing just the political environment affecting these middle companies in the UK. So we are seeing a sell-off. And we do have a target of about 3.6% lower, just the one target at the moment. But of course, the medium and long-term charts are bullish. And we have had a strong run in the FTSE 250 this year so far. So it's no big thing to see a sell-off there. The DAX is still bullish. We're bullish above the cloud and up very slightly this morning. And the Nikkei up 0.5% on that stronger dollar, weaker yen. That helps the constituents in the Japanese market. Hang Seng is down 0.25%, but bullish on all three time frames. Shanghai, the recovery continues here as well. We're still not bullish in the long term and medium term charts, but the short term charts are looking bullish with as much as 5% upside. So Chinese market looking better. The Sensex still looking pretty good, the Indian market, and the Australian market up just very slightly, but still bearish below the cloud, just testing support here in the short term on that point and figure chart. Now, taking a look at commodities, I was at a conference yesterday with a lot of talk on crude, and the fundamentals, a lot of people talking about how the fundamentals were fairly good with OPEC, etc., but the technicals are still pretty poor, and it's hard to see crude having a good end to this year, which people were talking about. And at the moment, we're seeing downside pressure, and so we're bearish. On the Brent chart, we're seeing downside to 46.77 in the short term. That's nearly 2%. We've activated this downside target to 36.27, and we've got a long-term target of 41.74. We are still bullish in the long term in terms of the trend, but of course, the second half of the year is where we really struggle. At best flat last year, but most years we tend to fall away, and we are, of course, just nudging these new lows here below the cloud. So crude still looking pretty bad. WTI, much the same story, looking pretty bad here. We haven't got an activated downside target on the 60-minute chart, but on the medium-term charts, we are seeing targets into the mid-30s. So crude oil set to fall further. US nat gas just holding its own above the $3 level, but and bullish on all three charts, but no real clear upside potential at the moment in the short term. We're seeing things like copper moving very strongly up, and coffee. Most softs are still pretty weak, but we are just seeing that improvement. Cotton also just looking pretty bearish in the short term. Pretty mixed picture just generally on short soft commodities. Taking a look at gold, gold is pulling back, so we have activated this downside target. We are still awaiting this move higher. The longer term charts are looking still bullish for gold, and we're just having this pullback at the moment to as much as 1263 on the short term chart. But if we can go higher on gold, then that's a 7% upside from here to 1363. So really quite key. Silver also just having a short-term sell-off as well. Taking a look at US Treasury yields, they're up 2.2%. So we are just seeing a marginal improvement there in the outlook for US interest rates. And taking a look at tech, Apple fairly flat yesterday. Google also just flat, but looking still very strong, as is Amazon. Facebook ticking up to a new high, so that's looking pretty bullish. And again, lots of upside targets there for Facebook. And Microsoft, just a little bit of a sell-off yesterday, but still looking really bullish on the charts. That's it for today. Let's see how this all plays out at this sterling rate. Keep an eye on that chart today for any lurches lower. But until Monday, happy charting. Have a great weekend. See you then.